a couple of things before I get started. Uh, this is an educational channel about Native American lore, in particular, the lore about the Sabe and Redbone people and other such cryptids. So if you aren't interested in that sort of thing, have a good morning. There are other channels for you. So, Uncle Long would come when I was ill, when I was 7, and I remember asking him one time, you know, how did we learn language? Does your lore have anything to say about that? What does it say about that? And he described that we learned to make sounds to mimic our game animals, the animals that we would hunt, and that this happened back in prehistoric times, and that we would mimic like dinosaur calls, smaller ones, not the bigger ones. Uh, they ate us. So, it started with like pops, click kind of sounds. There would be whistles. I can't whistle anymore. It's too cold. So, you have to attract an animal to catch it. And we learned that there were patterns to those languages. And that's what initially started us using tapping and animal calls. It was our first communications. So we would signal each other, hey, I'm over here. And, make the next sound. Go get that one. Or, let's go. And some of those, early language forms are still utilized. We just don't realize it. And they typically mainly mean the same sorts of things. Like certain kinds of words kind of stay consistent. But then, after we learn to attract our prey and we learn to identify certain sounds that they made, which ones were warning calls, which one were territory calls, which ones were, predator in the area, etc., etc. We started utilizing that same sort of call system. We'd go, oh, okay, yeah, that's how they tell each other. Well, if we blend in and we warn each other the same way, then those animals, those creatures around us become, you know, part of the communication system. And of course, in really ancient times, there were not birds. They're more recent Jurassic period or coniferous period critter. But we did still continue to adapt our language. And over time, we actually not only developed, a knocking system to communicate. We learned about echo bowls, we learned about echo points, and we learned how to form communication words. Some of those original languages were very alien sounding and sound like what we speak today. Some of them are just all clicks. And that would be a whole sentence or a thought. But you had to know what the clicks were. And that's, the tapping is that sort of thing. And then once we got to a point where we were very fluent to communicating with the animals around us, we learned some of them actually had some sort of language sounds that we couldn't mimic. So as we learned to mimic them, or other more vocalization, being able to speak while inhaling and exhaling, that was one of the big ones. Or doing circular breathing and being able to speak. Those were all things that we learned to develop language from. And it was us trying to mimic some of the more peculiar sounds and then realizing that those sounds had very finessed meanings in some of those animals. And in fact, some of the dinos, according to my Uncle Long's lore, actually spoke a form of rudimentary language. So that's basically how we learned both the knocking system and our basic languages. Now, as time went on and we became either more isolated or we were, drawn apart or thrown apart by whatever was going on in the area, volcanic action or massive tsunamis or other things, because weather wasn't always the best. Most weather was good, But the coniferous period, I think the average temperature was like 94 on a good day, up to like 105, very humid. But other periods, Jurassic period was a little cooler, etc. So we also adapted our languages to seasons. Hey everyone. Hey Sunflower. Hi Jerry. Hey, good to see you, Jerry. Slightly chilly Florida. Yeah, I would like a slightly warm Oregon. It's been in the 30s, 40s during the day here, which is chilly for us. Used to be warmer than that in the winter. So language is developed out of those basic forms of communication, and that's why the Sabe, the Bigfoot people who work from the heart, and they're not red bone people, they're going to eat you or enslave you. Uh, that's where they still have that rudimentary original language system going on. They still utilize knocks. They still utilize animal calls to communicate. And, they have language. Most of it's Asiatic. But then, getting onto the subject of Asiatic, let's not go with modern countries. Let's go with the oldest known language in the world. 130,000 years. Ainu. Ainu is technically a cryptid language. At least that's what my Japanese aunt claimed. She claimed that the Ainu people were the first people on the island of Nippon, because that's what they called it, not Japan, Nippon. And they were actually Nipponese people, not Japanese people. So if you're looking at the oldest language, it still has 3 speakers left. Only 3. And one of them isn't really known. Only 2 are actually on the books as being fluent. So in 130,000 years, we're down to 3 people who can actually speak the language, except probably for the Sabe. I'm pretty sure they've got a lot of Ainu in their language because they have so many correlations between Chinese and Japanese, Taiwanese, Cantonese, Korean, Tagalog, etc. So they fit all of those languages fit in their normal, you know, pattern of speech. So they also have very mixed sounding languages. You know, they, they put different kinds of language together. And I wouldn't call it mimicking. I'd actually say those are roots, root forms. And the reason why I say that is because some of the meanings of their words are so old, you can't find the actual meaning anymore. It's sort of like their last name. Some of their last names, like Monongon, which there are like 6,000 people in the world that have that name, uh, those family lines with those last names are dying out. So again, that suggests to me that those are root words, root family names, original, not modern. And they're leftover because those individuals' family lines happen to survive various kinds of disasters. So keep that in mind. They don't mimic. They are the root of language. We mimic them, technically, because we're speaking a variant of their languages. English is a modern language, though. So that's something they actually have to learn from us, which they do a very good job of. They pick up our language very quickly. It only took me about a year to teach Jen Jen how to speak English. It took her almost 3 years to teach my dumb ass how to speak hers. And, I look at hers as an original dialect of Abenaki because it's the closest to Abenaki. That's a modern pronunciation. And Ainu, those are the 2 closest languages to what she spoke. And she still, had slightly different pronunciations to things or additional words. Like, there were Japanese words, Ainu words in her Abenaki. So keep in mind that we don't know everything. And if their languages, even Abenaki is, I think there's only 200 people left that speak that language. Their languages are, us being able to speak their languages, we are dying out. The languages that we understand that still belong to them as regular conversational language, we've almost lost. So another reason for, exposing what my lore is and what my understanding is, because, we're at a break point here on being able to understand them. It will get to a point where, oh, well, that sounds just a monkey sound. But you have no idea. If you don't have film of it, go ahead and call it whatever you want, but you have no idea. If you've seen it firsthand, then you have an idea, but you still don't have any proof of it. So I just love these theorists. And then, the fact that they also kept some of the critters that they learned to talk from. And there's some of that suggested in the Sierra sounds. And then, you can hear the difference in the language. The Dogman's actually got a very different clickish, kind of oofish sounding language. But when they're not doing their original form of language, they're speaking a more modern form. They will speak a form of Chinese. It's Pinyin, it's ancient, it's what you call simplified, because that's the older form of language. But it's still there. And then, the individuals that speak Japanese, Nipponese, it's an older period language. Closest you can get with translating their kana is into the hiragana and katakana of the Edo and pre-Edo period, 400 to 600 years ago. So, again, their language is incredibly old. So, we might actually be able to learn a lot about our languages if we can learn to communicate with them. And they also have a very Asiatic concept of things. So let's get into a little bit about some of their culture and some of their habits. There's something that is shared between the Namahugi, which are the Bigfoot of Japan, that my Japanese aunt told me about. Because while I was learning Ainu from her, she was teaching me the lore of Japan about their culture being the first culture on the island, and that they were originally cryptids. They were Bigfoot. They were hairy people. But, as they crossed married and married into people that came there, because there were a great number of different people on the planet, things changed for them. They lost most of their hair, etc., body hair, whatnot. But they're still the only people in Japan that grow facial hair. Funny thing is most Native Americans can't grow facial hair either, unless, they're part Sabi. And there's a lot of that. So, the one thing that is shared between the Skakkum here and the Namahugi in Japan is that they punish their children the same way, which is amazing. So, what happens is if a child makes a mistake, like trading with a human that they don't have permission to trade with, or they are disrespectful in some way, the child's put outside for a night in the cold. They're taught to mind by being shown what it is to be alone. Do you want to be alone? Because there's also the very native practice of shunning an individual. If the individual as an adult has been bad, they steal something. Children will have the same sort of thing going on. If they lie about something, if they destroy something that they aren't even supposed to flip and touch, for instance, you can be shunned. You can be fined. They have laws. So that one trait of punishing their children by putting them outside at night for a night to impress upon them, mind your manners, stay within the family, also shares the same phrase, which is Rijishin. Please, beg mercy, have some respect, give me what I'm due. That's what the child will scream. They will also scream very clearly in English, help, which is something that my Japanese aunt also claimed happened with the Namahugi children. They would do exactly the same behavior, make a big fuss about being cast out for a night, and scream for help. And I thought that was hilarious and unusual, and I did not understand why they would use a modern English word. My Japanese aunt corrected me and said, no, that's how peacocks communicate to each other in the morning. Help is a word that we learned from peacocks. And if you go at 4 in the morning out in the woods and you listen to peacocks who typically sit 30 feet up a tree, they will be screaming for help. Help! It's their morning call. So we learned to replicate it to bring them down on the ground because, none of them come out of the trees until, the eldest of them on the biggest one of them hits the ground. So if you scream for help on the ground as they're screaming for help in the trees, ha ha ha, you'll attract the prey down so you can get them for breakfast. So that's where that word actually comes from. I mean, we do have modern dictionaries now that classify them, but the first modern dictionary didn't come around until Shakespeare. Shakespeare was one of the first individuals to write down a dictionary. It was 25,000 words. Mind you, most people only have a 5 to 6,000 word vocabulary. So for that man to write down 25,000 words for a dictionary means he talked to a lot of people. He understood a lot of things, and he learned a lot of different language variants or concept variants for words. And that's 1500s. So our modern understanding of language is very, very short in distance historically. And even, Chinese only goes back 5,000 years to pinyin. That's the first written form. If you go back into the cuneiform and stuff like that, it goes back 6,000, 10,000 some areas. That's nothing compared to Ainu, which is 120,000 years. Or 130,000 years, excuse me, got the wrong. They're pre-Ice Age. So we don't have the end-all be-all of language. We just have the beginning of, writing our words down instead of memorizing them all, which is what the Sabi do. They memorize, like Chinese are what, 86,000 characters for basic language. They have to memorize all of their kana, and they have 130,000 kana that I'm aware of. So they have a very intricate language, very ancient language, and a language that's very composite-like, but, it's, I think, the root of our languages. I think as we separated from them, married away from them, etc., we lost those languages, or they became more specialized to the areas that we were in, more family-oriented. You use a lot of slang. You change a lot of stuff within your own family with your language. You can say "yup" to your brother, and it might mean something completely different than what other people would perceive it as. So keep that in mind too. There's the way we use language is also important. And the funny thing is there's a lot of remnants of the Sabe language within Native American culture and with our own culture. The pig pole, name of the pig pole. Native Americans utilized a singular pole, not a, well, some of them put up a hashtag if they were going to roast you alive. Um, but a pig pole was something that the Carolina Indians, that lower belt of Indians utilized as part of their torture and punishment methods. So there's a lot of slang that we still utilize. Doghouse. That's what the Oma will do with their children. They don't toss them out for night. They put them in the doghouse. So they'll lay out, in stick form, a little house. It has a box-style body to it and a A-frame roof, just like a house. And when you're bad, you'll see that image as a child. They will tell you, the adult will tell you, you're in the doghouse. Means they're not going to talk to you. They're not going to give you anything. No food, no water. They won't receive anything from you. They won't let you give them food, water, or interact with them in any way. And if you try to, they will turn away from you and ignore you. And they will ignore you for a set period of time, depending on what kind of bad behavior you did. I got put in the doghouse for about 10 days because I hit Jen one time because I got frustrated that she didn't want to continue writing down ABC for me when she already knew them. I was 6 at the time. So I popped her on the top of the head with my slate board. I got put in the doghouse. I wasn't allowed to talk to her or do anything. That really hurt my feelings. But then I realized the way to get out of the doghouse is apologize and correct your behavior. So it was a good lesson. So those are the kinds of cultural things that some of them do. Some of the Sabe actually pop their kid across the face. You know, you don't talk back. They'll slap you. And you don't want to get slapped by something that hits that hard. I watched Jen Jen move 4 railroad ties at the backside of one of our buildings. They were just pressure stacked. It was the backside of our freezer. She just moved like they were, like she was turning the page in a book. It didn't look like she exerted any kind of effort whatsoever. And, they were, I think, 120-pound or 200-pound ties. They were the big ones used for trestles. I think they're 200 pounds. And they're, oil treated. That's part of the reason why they're so heavy. And they're, what, 10 by 10 by 4 feet or something? Or 12 by 12 and 4 feet. They're huge. And then, there's pressure of 10 of them stacked on top of each other. And, meh, shouldn't think anything of it. But they understand their strength, unlike other primates. You see, there's a distinction also between us and greater primates in that greater primates don't know their strength. They don't realize they can break you. Um, Bigfoot do. The children sometimes don't because they haven't learned that finesse yet. Just like our kids will, act out and, punch fight with each other or whatever, and you get hurt because, you're goofing off. So anyway, enough of that. So you got any questions? Yeah, it is getting chilly everywhere, Sunflower. Oh, that's... Go read the newspaper. They put a post up about our tax dollars being spent on our weather program. Visiting Japan is at the top of my bucket list. Oh, awesome. If you learn some basic conversational Japanese, they appreciate it. But please don't mispronounce stuff. They won't like that. Okay, Sunflower, I wonder if they can understand accents in English. Scottish can be quite difficult to understand for non-natives. Alas, yeah, I wondered that myself. I think regionally they probably would because they're growing up around the people. Like Scottish people's brogue is really heavy. You can't understand it. I know. I tried to talk to my ex-husband's father, and my husband's from Scotland, and his parents were very, very Scottish. So trying to talk to his father, I couldn't hardly understand him. I had to always hand the phone over. Interpret for me. I don't know what he's saying. So yes, I would say they may have difficulty, just like we would have why we have difficulty understanding their English language because they have quite thick accents sometimes. And even the dogmen who speak Chinese, Pinyin, uh, when they say when they say ni hao, it will sound like meow because their accent's very thick. So it's like they have a Chinese accent or Japanese accent on top of a Chinese accent. It's very peculiar sometimes to try to communicate with them. Ah, well, Jerry, my Guanche father, he's a species that looks like a gorilla. Gray skin, black hair, has the domed head. Patty is a Guanche. He claimed the Solomon Islands was where his people originated from, but there were other species of people. There were hairless individuals and giants that also lived on those particular islands, and that they did not like the behavior of the people without hair because they were cannibals. And they did not like the behavior of the giants because they were cannibals, technically red-bone people in the, Guanche mine. So they actually learned to build boats and they left. They immigrated actually from there to America. There were a couple of other offshoots that went elsewhere. And then, there were also still Guanche in Africa at the time. Because in Libya, actually, there were Guanche. Because that's actually, when you're getting into the story of Gilgamesh, the individual that's described and portrayed usually in the stories is a Guanche man, just nobody realizes it. And there are, I think, the Ishka, which you call the Janoska, I think they speak a form of Japanese. And I know that the Dogmen write in a form of Japanese. Their kana is top to bottom, not right to left. Like the others are just usually placed. But the Dogmen will write out, you know, usually hiragana from top to bottom. I got a couple of pictures of that stuff laying around somewhere. I'll have to post them for you guys. I think I've posted some of it. There are also other language forms that they use and they lay out in stick kana. There's a form of Urdu, which is ancient Hindi. I don't see it very often, but I have seen it up in this area and in a couple other locations. So next time I can find a good example that hasn't been walked on too much, because that's the biggest problem with that one. For some reason, they like to lay it where others walk. So it gets disturbed rather quickly. It's very hard to find one of those kanas that hasn't been, or kanji, glyph, whatever you want to call it, that has not been disturbed. And I always try to get you a good one that hasn't been broke up or disturbed or brushed over in some way. Because it's far easier for, anyone learning to learn from an accurate thing, excuse me, than to have to piece together the concept. And then I haven't seen any other peculiarities. Just the ancient pinyin, Japanese, Urdu are what they write in typically. I haven't found any other examples of language yet. But, written language and written figuratively, in sticks on the ground. But, if you're living naturally within the world and you prefer not to modernize, it's an excellent medium. It's low-key, people aren't going to notice it, and even if they do notice it, they're going to pass it by because it doesn't make any sense, or they'll think, oh, somebody laid that down, or, maybe a dog chewed that stick, or blah, 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 blah. But, they won't look at the evidence. If a dog chewed it, it's going to have tooth marks in it, in particular canine marks. And if it was made in some other way, you're still going to have some evidence of that, evident on the sticks themselves. Except for, somebody with hands laying down kana. And I don't think there are a bunch of Asian people running around dropping kana on the ground everywhere. But you can grab just about any Asian and say, hey, what does that say? Because they can read this stuff. Which means there's still enough crossover in the kana types and the kanji types that it's readable. And I've actually done that a couple of times with bigger kanji that I couldn't make out. I grabbed somebody that was Asian. Hey, can you read this? And typically, when they can, they'll tell me it's very formal, very ancient, very polite, hiragana or katakana. So that's another indication of culture. These people have set behaviors about expectation. So you don't go into their house without making yourself known, meaning you don't walk in their garden, they don't walk in their yard. So walking through their area, use the symbol that they require. That's a good one, just coughing. Hi, it lets them know that you're there, you don't startle them. And it allows them time to move their children and their pets or whatever thing that they might be keeping out of your way. Uh, and in fact, that little peculiar sound on the 17-second video, it's an archaic, it's some sort of historic sound, it's an ancient sound of some type. I only assume, because of the peculiar bean-shaped flippin' track. That's the other thing, the older the creature is, the more round or bean-shaped the track will be, not as modernized and defined and more A-framed or A-padded, a higher center area here in the paws of something. They'll be flatter across that area. Instead of having a high bump, they'll have more of just an arch. And most things from ancient times seem to have far more rounded toes, etc. So whatever that sound is, it's a historic sound. I only assume it's saber potentially because of the peculiar track and because it fits the description of something I've been told about by my grandmother. But it also could be some sort of dino. I doubt that it is a Sabi or a Bigfoot because the entire four times, excuse me, it's been a long day. My van died on me as I was going to work today. That was fun. So the entire 4 years that Jen, the Oma female Bigfoot that was on our property, was there, there were only two animal-like sounds that she ever made. And that was screaming for a mate, which sounds like a woman screaming bloody murder. And she'd do that while she was sitting up in a tree. And she would growl at the gugway. Arrgh! Other than that, she didn't make any animal sounds at all. So all of the peculiar sounds that people are hearing, maybe it's the males that make those sounds, but I know the females don't. At least her species didn't. I don't know about other species. And I know that the few times I've heard oofs, or the one time I heard a growl, that was an actual audible, big enough growl from a couple hundred feet away, that it scared the hell out of the person next to me. And the fighting growls, the battle growls that the dogman and the bear went through. Everything that I've heard that's been a high volume thing, it has been related to conflict. It's been related to defending themselves against something or taking something down that's bigger. So I don't think that those are normal average calls. I think those are specific to what's going on. Oh, and before I get too far off track, one of the other things that Uncle Long claimed was that most of the dinosaur sounds were minuscule. Their tone level was really low with a lot of their vocalizations. There weren't screams, there weren't yowls as much. They seem to have the same sort of vocalization patterns for similar sized animals of today is the way Uncle Ong described it to me. So, a big cat wouldn't have a bigger yowl. An elephant-sized dino isn't going to have a bigger bellow than an elephant, for instance. So, we also have a bit of an inflamed, overzealous understanding. We think what we see, dino-wise in movies is how they sounded. No, that's not the case. And you also have to understand that if everything is running around bellowing at each other, everybody's going to know where they're at. Every predator is going to know where every prey is. Every prey is going to know where every predator is. And that really doesn't make sense to get dinner. Typically, look at today's animals. When you go out in the woods, even if you got sign up that says, hey, there's cougar and bear in the area, how often do you see them? You don't. Unless they're hungry, or they're in rut, or they're coming out of a cave in the springtime, then you'll see them and stay out of their way because they're usually dangerous and they will go after you. So also the cycle of behavior has a lot to do with how animal's volume might be. So let's answer a few more questions. Well, good morning, Jerry Outlaw, and have a good day at work. Uh, Jerry, interesting origin of the word help. Yeah, I mean, there's, I think, it's Germanic and Greek, if I remember right, too, how we classify it. But again, our dictionaries have only been around since the 1500s. I will watch later today, thank you. Yeah, no problem, Jerry. Hey, John. Good to see you. Okay, John, what's your opinion of Dee's Dark Adventures? I have watched it several times and seen risky behavior, human, not Sabe. Unfortunately, I have not seen Dee's Dark, at least not that I remember off the top of my head. But there is a lot of, there's a lot of misconception about these people. Everybody thinks they're a monkey because they look like a monkey. And yeah, some of them have still got, how would you say, cultural expectations. Like when my mother took me up into the Ishkwa caves, she warned me, don't look them in the face. And when I was uh, testifying against the Gagwe in front of the Booger woman and the Ishka, Janoskwa husband, her man, I was told not to look them in the face. But it's not because they act like monkeys. It's because they saw it as a disrespectful thing because uh, the Janoskwa are the parent species to some of the Sabe, like the Guanche. And they consider it disrespectful if you look them in the face. They consider themselves somewhat imperial. So you have a very Asiatic mind in that respect. If you meet a person of higher standard, you're supposed to bow a certain depth, for instance. You can't just nod your head. You have to go, like if you're in front of the emperor, you have to go all the way down to your head better touch your knees, because otherwise it's not a proper bow. But, somebody who's got just a little bit more status than you, you only have to lower your head, an inch or two below where they bow. Just enough to show submission. And that's what the Ishka, the Janoskwa, and Booger people require of you. You have to show reverence for their status within the hierarchy of the cultures overall. And, some of the Bigfoot, like the Guanche, they have a very high respect for the Ishka. So they always, because they're considered their parent species, so they always act accordingly. So there's those kinds of behaviors that could be mistaken. And if you don't know certain ways of interacting with them, they will take offense to your behavior. They will consider you rude. So there's that to keep in mind. It's not all about the peculiar behaviors that we're being told. We're being told that they always tear animals apart, that they rip things apart, blah, 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 blah. Well, there are more than just Sabe cryptids out there. There are things out there that can bite stuff in half. And then there are also red bone people. The red bone people do tear their food apart. But then they aren't Sabe, they aren't Bigfoot, they aren't congenial with us. They're the ones that are violent anyway. And I think that's actually what some of the stories are about. They're running into doppelganger species that look like Bigfoot but don't act like them, like the Gugway. And, the other more violent species, sun-faced people, etc. And that's something that's typically not put in the descriptions because, you either don't see the animal being, and we're animals too, so don't get your panties in a bunch. So I think some of it is we aren't giving each other enough descriptions. We don't notice if they're bald. We're too scared out of our wits. We don't notice if they've got, cream-colored skin, or like a sunburnt skin instead of, or red skin. You know, there is a red-skinned crawler out here east of me somewhere, and it's that those red-skinned crawlers have been known about since the late 40s, early 50s, so they're still around. And there's also a red-faced Bigfoot of some kind over there, and that could possibly be a tengu, which is an ancient species originally from Mongolia, at least according to my father, because his family lore talked about cryptids too, and he was Russian, Mongolian, and German, mostly. Hey, Cosmic. When I arrived at a spot where I know they're at, heard what sounded a little like stick being banged on a can. Hmm, I can believe that. Multiple ding sounds. I wonder if they were doing that to let others know I had arrived. Yeah, it's possible. You'd have to get a recording of it to be able to translate it. Because there are set sequences of knocks that mean particular things. That's why I've been reinforcing that two is always friend, but two taps also means dog. Um, so sometimes their taps, due to context, have more than one meaning. Others don't. Three is always human. And then, the various taps in between. And the tones of the taps, and the pauses in the taps. Because if I say, if I'm in a conversation and I'm using the tap method, meaning I'm tapping to an individual and individual is tapping to me, there are certain sequences of taps that mean certain things. And some of them you cannot replicate by snapping your fingers together. You actually have to tap them out. Like the thing for Shunka Oak, or the dog man. So it's a single, and then two, and then one. 4 taps total, but when it's tapped out correctly, it almost sounds like 3. It's almost like even a haircut, but you tap it very quickly. And when they're tapping, they don't they expect you to keep up. So if you can't understand what's being tapped and can't delineate how many taps are happening in sequence, you get lost in the conversation pretty quickly. And that was something that's always been kind of difficult for me in some cases because some of their tapping is so dang quick. Yeah, I need it recorded just so I can slow it down. And the really nifty thing though is if you tell them you're dumb, slow down, I'm dumb. They'll actually slow down their tap sequences so you can catch up. I've had them do that. You have to be able to interact with them in a way. When you're conversing, you've got your two, and then you can use a snap at the end, and that's basically saying, I'm friend, how about you? What are you? And if they want you to talk more, they'll put the tap at the front and then two behind. So it's also sequences. The sequence will change. Or there'll be a pause in the middle depending on what's going on. You have a 1, then you'll have a 2, and then you'll have... So those tap sequences all have meaning. It's more like Morse code. And with specific characteristics delineated for specific kinds of beings. And, when they're tapping to each other and communicating across distance, which they quite often do, they'll communicate up to about 5 miles, ouch, with taps like that, depending on what they're tapping on. When they're doing wood knocking at great distance, they're using, either heavier material or bigger sticks and bigger trees to smash on. And you will find, spots where the bark is dented or completely smashed off the side of a tree where they've been banging the heck out of it with a bigger stick. And they usually leave those sticks nearby, so you can find both of them if you're lucky. But, they'll tap for an hour or two to communicate back and forth between groups. So if somebody was in the right spot, you could sit there and make the recording. And they do this usually during the day. So you can sit around and make recordings of them tapping. It's a lot of people will think it's chopping wood because it sounds a lot like somebody chopping wood, except it isn't, because you'll sit there and you'll listen to it and you realize, oh, that's a rhythm, and why would somebody chop wood in that? There's no reason for that, and the pauses won't be right. If you're chopping wood, you're gonna pause differently, or you're gonna have more. If you're chucking wood back and forth, picking stuff up, you're gonna have different differences, and you're not going to have somebody answering you with the same or similar tap sequence from a couple of miles away. That wouldn't happen. So there is a possible way of capturing, their tapping. If you can find a location where two or more groups are communicating during the day when they're banging on wood, you could probably get some good examples of it. And it'd be, easier to be able to understand that it is a, coded form of language. It's a Morse code type, basically. Yeah, there are stories that say that because Sasquatch, Sasquattle, those are all their original names, and those are in some instances those are cousin tribal names. So yeah, I don't think they would mind the term Sabe either, because Sabe means good-hearted. An individual that is forthright, upright, truthful, honest, etc., reliable. Mm, That's, good implications like that are the Sasquatch like that because that's their behavior. Again, like I said, their customs are very strict about mannerisms and what's okay within their society and what is not okay. And I think that's a lot of the peculiarness with, people going out and trying to incite something. Well, other primates don't do any of the behavior that researchers are utilizing to try to communicate. You don't go out and tap at monkeys. You don't go out and tap at gorillas. You don't go out and, bang rocks together at chimpanzees because they don't communicate that way typically. They'll throw rocks at you, but so will we. Okay, so let me see what else is here for questions. Okay, Cosmic. How do you interpret the biblical accounts about the Nephilim and how it relates to cryptids today? Like, for example, the material talk, talked about by Gray Wayne. Does it ring true? I don't know. I haven't read his material. I don't have the opinion that they're Niflheim. If anything were Niflheim, it'd probably be the critters that fell from the other planet. Uh, but uh, their mythology cycle goes back too far. The Bible says the earth was created 6,000 years ago. If their language is at least 130,000 years old, that kind of puts them out of that myth cycle completely. And I haven't seen them do anything that I guess Niflheim would do. Yeah, they doesn't make any sense to me, to be honest. And it doesn't really mean anything good or bad. It just means that potentially, the Bible is trying to describe them in a way that was relevant to the culture in that area. Because wasn't Christ Aramaic, if I remember right? So it would be up to what was culturally known in their areas. And, it might be like some of the red bone people known here, like the shark teeth people, what we call the fish people, the Gugway, that sort of thing. Maybe it's some sort of ancient story that's trying to tell about the bad ones or something. That seems more logical to me. I don't get into the whole. They don't teleport anywhere. Jen Jen didn't teleport anywhere. She lived on a ranch for, well, between the. I turned 5 when she was first there, and 9.5 was the last time I saw her. So 4.5 years. And she never teleported anywhere. She slept on the dirt floor of the chicken coop and went out in the morning and cleaned up, washed her face, cleaned her body, washed her feet, went and got food, sat around, ate, hummed in the afternoon when she was meditating, went back to bed. Um, I never saw her, other than when she was meditating, I didn't ever see her do anything out of the ordinary for a physical being. She didn't walk through portals, she didn't telepathically communicate with me, she spoke. Um, it's just like you and I sitting here, if we were sitting next to each other, talking, it would be just like that. It wasn't anything peculiar. You know, I think we got a lot of mythology due to the current lore about them has a lot of mythology. The concepts of them and some of their abilities have been glorified. They've been turned into myth. Well, if they disappear, they must go to another dimension. No, I never saw that happen. If they talk to you, it must be mind speak, telepathy. Maybe they're just riding a language on another wave. Maybe they're able to utilize infrasound and ride another tone on top of it. That's how radio wave signals work. That's how we have international communication. That's how Wi-Fi to a degree works. You're still riding a tone, so that makes more sense. And just because they can rattle it around in your head just means they can pinpoint their infrasound and they can direct it at you. And what you might think you're hearing may actually be just a vocal effect of theirs. So maybe it's our not understanding what they're doing that's causing the mythology. And, because I've never really experienced, except for once, I've never really experienced anything that I would even consider classified as mind speak or telepathy. And, the dynamics of where I was at, I was in a basement apartment that only had one window in it, and the way the apartment was set up, it would have been very easy to bounce sound through the window and make me auditorily hear it next to my ear, or bounce it into my skull. Because this is the really nifty thing. Elephants. Elephants can hear their own infrasound because their intercochlea ear and the shape of their skull, they can bounce the infrasound back and forth between their ears. And I think it's a calculation of 1/3 of sound or something to verify it. But elephants can hear their own infrasound. So if elephants are really ancient, which they are, uh, elephants go back, about 6 million years or something, and originally some of them had 4 or 6 tusks and were massively huge. If those things could use infrasound and bounce around in their large skulls, then it would make sense that something that's 10 feet tall would, if they used infrasound, which we obviously know they do, might have the potential to hear their own infrasound, which means they could pinpoint and target. Because if you can hear it, in your own dang skull, you can probably figure out a lot of the dynamics that a person that doesn't hear infrasound wouldn't be able to figure out. We actually can hear infrasound to a degree, just a lot of people don't realize it. If you plug both your ears with your fingers and just overlap the skin into your ear, you'll hear three tones. You'll hear your heartbeat, donk, donk, donk. You'll hear whoosh, 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 and you'll hear a bass line. The bass line's your nervous system. The heartbeat is obvious. The whoosh, whoosh, whoosh is the blood in your veins. All of that cardiovascular system is infrasound already. That's why when, the stethoscope is put up, you've got to have a little hole in the back of it to block it so you can hear the infrasound. That's the design of the device, is allowing you to hear infrasound, the heartbeat. So keep that in mind. We conceptually don't realize we can hear it because we're always told, oh no, humans can't hear infrasound. No, you just have to plug your ears and listen to your own cardiovascular system. Okay, so cosmic. Regarding tearing animals apart, I've seen a bird that looks like it exploded. Feathers all over the place. Looks like it got vaporized into a pile of feathers. Uh, Wondering what did that. Well, catch the wrong bird with the wrong shot size, that can happen. Um, Something going through the animal typically will do that, especially if it's smaller compared to something larger. Otherwise, you might have a feather explosion with a raptor grabbing it if it's a smaller bird. They have a tendency to knock a lot of feathers out of the bird sometimes. Um, Other than maybe a rock, uh, potentially a rock could do something like that. If you hit it hard enough, it would just kind of splatter the bird. But it'd have to be pretty high velocity because you don't blow feathers unless they're pulling the feathers out. You know, there's that. But you'd have to have something high velocity to poof a bird, so to speak. At least I think. But I would have to see the evidence. And I don't remember running across that. I've run across deer that have had their legs twisted off, fawns, had their skin pulled off. I've ran across peeled animals, where the fish skin or the squirrel skin or critter skin of some kind will be, peeled backwards, rabbits, that sort of thing I've seen. Uh, and I've seen birds parted out, wings removed, uh, the body stripped as if somebody's eating it, the feet twisted off and left behind. It's not cougar evidence or coyote evidence. And the tail gone, that's another common thing. Or I'll find an area where both wings and the tail are gone. That's usually some sort of ritual behavior, as in these might be turned into a headdress, they might be turned into a fan, they might be for medicine, you know, maybe it's a shaman who's taking those kinds of things. But typically you don't see animals, at least not here in the Northwest. I haven't seen a lot of that. And I've been all over the Northwest. I've been into the deep woods. I've been in the city. I've been in the country. I've been everywhere all my life. And I don't see a lot of that. But, the further east you go, and the further up, you get in the Rockies, that's very common. You get over into Montana, you get a lot of cows ripped apart. But it's not your standard Sabi behavior. That is more red-bone people behavior. So again, it's the kind of cryptid that's out there. I think each feeds a very particular way, and I think that is evident by what I've been showing. Barrowman, the Oma, the Guanche, They'll have a tendency to use a lot of small varmints, ground food, as it were. They don't eat a lot of bigger stuff. They'll eat eggs, they'll eat small game. They don't get into the bigger stuff unless it's for a ceremonial purpose. But then there are other cultures that do game hunt. It seems that the Skookum game hunt more than regular because they have a heavy tool use. Again, dogmen may hunt more because they have a heavy tool use. They have a particular spear specifically for taking down bigger animals like moose and elk. And the deer pinning sticks in some areas are big enough to suggest that they're dealing with a larger animal, like an elk. So I think it depends on the race of cryptid that we're dealing with, and the type of evidence is probably relevant to that particular race or species of cryptid. Whatever their feeding behavior is, like the gugway, it liked to tear apart its little crawdads and eat the poor little things alive, kicking and fighting. So it's the behavior of what natives call red bone people. We always saw those as the ones that were violent. We always understood they were the ones that would enslave you. They were the ones that would trick you. The red bone people were the ones that would eat you. We understood that. We understood that the Sabi were our forest brothers, and they were the ones that we go to for help. They're the ones that would take us in. They would teach us how to forage, or they would feed us. They would expect us to forage with them. In fact, some tribes here in the Northwest adapted to the types of Sabe in their area, the types of Sasquatch. The Nootka, for instance, they weave a hat that gives them a domed head, and they wear a capelet shawl to keep your rain off, to give wider looking shoulders. By the way, they also do some of this behavior in Japan. There have been tribes, or not tribes, but villages of older Japanese individuals from a couple hundred years ago, just like Native Americans, a couple hundred years ago, that would design their clothing in certain ways to give them bigger shoulders and domed heads so that the Sabe Bigfoot that they were living near, the Forest Brothers, would just kind of go, oh, well, it's another Sabe. And I have experimented with that. I got myself a coat that looked like a big furry gorilla suit. It was nice and thick and gave me wide shoulders and had a nice deep hood. Then I'd go in and sit down in, certain areas of Bigfoot territories where I knew there were a lot of them in a very small confined area, just to see if they behaved differently. Yeah, they did. They got closer. They didn't consider me a outcast, as it were. Weren't wary of me. But that doesn't mean that they weren't wary of me because I'd done anything miraculous like mimic their behavior. No, I was just disguising myself, just like some of the native people have. Indigenous people sometimes have outfits that are relevant to the kinds of species they have to deal with in their areas where they live. You carry a bear rattle with you if you're in their territory, and that's a item of clothing in considered in some areas because it's necessary. You gotta have something that jingles at your side so you scare the bears away because you got too many of them. And that's only if you've got bears that are scared of you. Because the more habitualized a bear gets to you, the more likely they are not to be scared of unusual sounds. But 100 years ago, you rattling something around them would scare them because they weren't used to hearing it. Now they've got cars and trains and foghorns and all kinds of bizarre stuff that they hear, so they don't. Bears come into town, so to speak, now because they aren't afraid of anything. They've heard it all. According to no cosmic, I haven't. Have you heard of this group called the Quillil Tear or something like that? Suddenly, an original name for, supposedly an original name for the Sasquatch, and that they arrived from another world, according to the RA material. Well, Jen didn't know what a spaceship was. She knew lore about natives and their lore, but she didn't know what a spaceship was. She didn't understand what an airplane was. So if they were flying around in flying saucers or airplanes today, I'm pretty sure she would have known. And Guanch, he didn't talk about that sort of thing. Uncle Long, he said in ancient times, really ancient times, pre-Ice Age, we were advanced, and there were things like Romana, flying machines, spaceships, uh, but he didn't claim to, uh, he didn't claim that his culture had ever been in them. It wasn't his culture thing. It was other cultures here, advanced prehistoric cultures, or what we consider pre-ice age, uh, big disaster. That was the last time we got hit. The Younger Dryas event was, we had exploding comets, and a couple of them hit the planet, and that's what wiped out like something like 89, 94% of the everything on the planet about 12,000 years ago. So if only 3 to 6% of your stuff is surviving, that narrows down what's going to survive. Only things that are adapted to get through are lucky enough not to be on that side of the planet. And it was mostly North America that got hit by that. The rest of the world was good. You know, it destroyed 94% of the shit here almost immediately, and then the dust cloud kick up killed the other people on the other side of the planet because it was calcium carbonate that the asteroids were made out of. And calcium carbonate is incredibly dangerous to humans. You can't touch it, taste it, or sniff it, you'll die. Hey Charles, we got a local legend type thing. We call it the Dungor Von Hooper. Heard the story from my father, who heard it from his. Basically, a man was murdered, and he still roams the area making hooping sounds. Interesting. I haven't heard that story, but that's interesting. Makes me wonder. Okay, are you sure? What would 4 evenly spaced taps on my house aluminum siding occurring last winter just after dark done loudly mean? 4 taps. Did you have any other thing going on? Are you sure? Because normally 4 taps, but they typically have to be staggered. Means dog man. Um, Normally I have to have what's in front and behind it in order to, because there's no reference. I don't have a context. So only certain ones of the tapping sequence seems to be very set. The rest of them seem to be very contextual. So without knowing the context, I couldn't place why they would do that. It might just be a direct communication to you. Maybe they consider you dog-like. That can be good and that can be bad. Because if they see you as a coyote, it means you are looking at them too much and you're being too much like a predator. But if you're more like their concept of a good dog man, then they might be naming you in some way. That's a potential. Hey, this is your tap sequence. We're not going to call you a human because you're a little bit different acting, or we like you. So it's all on context. You have to understand the context to get that. Okay, Charles. Could be an unknown animal, considering the area is so thickly forested. They use an area as testing ground for Agent Orange. Oh, yeah, interesting. I know some of them, when they were testing Agent Orange, I heard from some of the Vietnam vets when I was a kid, because, it was the era for the Vietnam War, that some of the test zones were actually targeting Bigfoot cryptids. They did it intentionally in some areas just to see what the effects were going to be on them. So there's also that sort of potential. Just like, there was more than one ape type that they ran across in Vietnam. There was something that seemed more like the billy ape that was not consciously able to speak, didn't have language, and wasn't as big. They were human size, 6-foot-ish, and a lot of the descriptions given by the guys that ran into those things say no, they were some sort of big chimpanzee is what most of the people describe them as. And then there were other areas of Vietnam that had sun-faced people that ranged about 7-8 feet in height that could talk. So it depends on the soldier you talk to. And it depends on the location of Vietnam they were in. It seemed to have been regional. So there might be something like that going on. You've got something regionally there. Okay. Cosmic. Oh wow. The critters that fell from the other planet. I assumed they'd be Mars. That makes sense, actually. No, this was during the time, Cosmic, that our planet was still forming. It was still rather large. It was, according to Uncle Long's lore and according to the information left in the Middle East, it was about the size of Jupiter. And we got crashed into by a planetoid that's on a elliptical orbit. Marduk or whatever the heck you want to call it. The one that failed to come back. It could have collided with us again this time around, but it got lost somewhere behind Neptune, the constellation. Probably slammed into the back of something over there because of the elliptical orbit. It only had every so many generations it would come through and pass by. And once it originally clipped us, it kind of knocked itself loopy too. But it was actually the two planets actually colliding, not spaceships. And if you take a look in northern Alberta, there's still an iron plug ejecta core scene where we lost part of our planet's core after it cracked our surface. That's how our moon formed. But there's an iron plug that's like 280 miles long and like 200 miles across or something like that up there. I had a friend actually went up there and did some research on it and let me know about it. Because I had the story, but I didn't know the location until somebody else informed me. But that's what I mean by fell. So when the two planetoids crashed into each other, upheaval threw some of our people onto that planet, and it brushing us dumped a bunch of their giants and cryptids and other bizarre shit on our planet, and they all seem to have the same kind of red bone mentality, like they don't have an empathy gene, and they're very intelligent and trickstery, but they don't give a dang about you. They'll do whatever they want to you. They're completely different, like genetic and mental perspective than what was on this planet. So I think it's more that. Mars may have had another population on it, but then, Neptune may have had a population on it too. It's got some structures on it, and the backside was half blown away. There's a big hole in the backside of Neptune that nobody talks about. What ran into it that did that to it? In the Middle Eastern stories, it actually said that the planetoids hit more than once planets in this particular solar system. So that's potentially what happened to Neptune as well. And, there's some remnant technology on the moon. There are towers. There's that dome. There's some suggestion that there uh, was alien occupation at one point in time on the moon. Neptune's the same. There are towers on it, and I'm trying to think. Think there was another one. I want to say Uranus has, or one of the moons around Jupiter. That's what it is. It's one of the moons around Jupiter. It's got a looks like a tower on it too. So maybe that's something left over from when we actually had spaceships, and that we were, fortifying our own solar system by linking up satellites or doing relay systems within our own solar system. Because according to Uncle Long, at one point in time, we were that advanced. Even Native American stories tell about stuff like that, but they're really ancient stories. They're really ancient, and not many natives still know those stories, but they're still around. But I don't think it's that something came from outside of our solar system. I think the stuff that's floating around is more likely ours. And, if we were able to build technology and place towers on different places, then it would stand to reason that we'd occupy the planet next door if it was good enough to occupy. But the biggest problem with Mars and the whole concept that it had anything on it, it's not in the right zone. Uh, that planet isn't a fertile planet. It's not in the sweetheart zone, is what they call it. Where you're the right distance away from the sun, but not too far out to actually have life form on it. If anything, I'd say that Mars is probably either a really ancient planet that had gotten knocked out of place, which is possible, during our original collision, because I don't know how much that the planetoid may have bounced around in our solar system when it crashed into us. And because you always have action reaction when two things hit. So who knows what kind of a pinball situation happened here. But I don't have any stories about those kinds of cultures. And, some of the stuff that I've seen videos from Mars looks real. Some of it, though, is filmed in flippin' Egypt, in regions that, they don't publicize a lot. So there's also some tomfoolery going on with some of that information. So I'm waiting for better information, to be honest. Cosmic, do you think they physically swim or shapeshift into orbs to travel across oceans to get to islands uh, for rare flora and fauna? No, I don't think they shapeshift. I don't think they turn into orbs. I do know that they have a very complex trading system, though, and that they trade for some very interesting stuff. Like, I'm 57 miles away from the ocean, and some of the kana I have found have been asking for eel, sea cucumber, particular starfish, by species, how many legs the thing has. So they've got good trading routes, and on average, most stuff's 200-300 miles away sometimes. Because you have to remember, most of these people can run 50 miles an hour. So wherever you can drive with a car, they can run that distance on a trading trail. So sometimes I'll even I found part of a sea cucumber once, half bitten, bitten in half, laying up in the woods, no apparent reason. Definitely not a normal predator that grabbed it, not eagle predation or anything like that. There was no peck marks. It was just a clean bite, and evidently they didn't like it. I set it down. Or they were going to come back for it later, because that's another behavior I've seen. Some of these cryptid people will bite half an animal in half and leave it in a tree, or part of a fish, take it in half and stick it up in a tree, or they'll lay it in the grass, or they'll set it on a rock, and then they come back for it later. But no, I don't think that happens. And the entire time I was around Gentian, there was anything that she brought, she had to go retrieve. Like when she showed me her baby tools for uh, being a baby in their form of a sippy cup, for instance, which is elbow bone, knuckle bone off a bigger animal, and they hollow out the one end, they make it into a pour cup, and they do so because the shape of the bone allows their hands to actually hold it easily. And hers was very pretty. It was all carved. It was an elk bone, the elbow. But it was all carved. It had language carved on it. It was really beautiful, actually. But that was a tool. So those are things that they make. Um, they don't, or they trade for it. But she claimed that was actually something that her father carved, if I remember correctly, for her mother when her pregnancy came about with Tintin. Okay, let me see. Get into it. Oh my god, it's almost 5 a.m. I better answer the rest of these questions. I need to get to bed. I gotta tow my vehicle tomorrow and I gotta figure out how to get to work. Because I don't really want to walk 6.5 miles to work each way and back. No. So, they use boats, they use rafts, they use logs. They use logs as boats flotation devices. They will lash logs together. I've seen a rudimentary form of raft being used across a marsh, and they used a stick to manage it. So that's very common. And then there are stories like the accounts of Argos. Argos and the Argonauts, the Greek man who supposedly was the first boat builder. Well, his wife was supposedly a cryptid, and when he was charged with the concept of coming up with a boat, he had to go talk to his wife's father to have it explained to him. And actually, the Argos pin, which is a U-shaped, squared U-shaped device, which was used to hold, I think, sail lines in place, if I remember right, is something the, you know, Oma Bigfoot still use. They'll use an Argos pin when they're rolling up, you know, long material like berries or vines or anything that they want kept out of their way, and they'll use an Argos pin to pin it in place. They'll also use a double-ended J-hook to pin stuff in place. So, pull stuff down and hook it into place. So some of it's just tool use. Jenny was actually a very cool individual to be around. She was very reliable, very strong, and very diligent in protecting our family against the Gagwe. She was very concerned that if it got through her, it would come for my family and anybody else that was on the property. Oh, you're welcome, Cosmic. Yeah, I'm kind of a night owl myself. And, I figure people who are in different parts of the world, your day is at a different hour than my day, and my night's at a different hour than your night. So, uh, easier for people on the other side of the planet also to be able to interact. Because, say, most people gear their channels for where they're at, what timeline they're in. And they don't really do surprises in the middle of the night or they always have a set date, day and time, and you have to adjust to their schedule. I kind of like, I like a more giving relationship with my subscribers and whatnot. Oh, and speaking of subscribers, it looks like I will be able to have a nice cleaned up copy of the Sierra sounds. So I'll be able to do a better job at translation. It's going to take me a minute. I've got to be able to get into town and use my computer to do it because my phone doesn't have enough memory space. It's a big file. So I'm going to have to deal with that after I get the rest of my daily life stuff done, dealing with my freaking van broken bullshit, and getting to work. So hopefully I can be able to do that. Once the van's fixed, be a lot easier. Go get that downloaded, and then I will be able to actually do a better translation instead of trying to hear what exactly are they saying. Yeah, not to say that I don't have pretty good hearing, but it would be really nice to have a good cleaned up copy. So hopefully I'll be able to get that downloaded. Thank you, thank you, thank you. You know who you are. I really appreciate your. And the individual hadn't even made it for me. It was something they'd done on their own a couple of months back, and just didn't have anyone that could help him out or utilize it. So he's letting me utilize that, and that's really awesome. I'm glad for that. Are there seal or sea lion cryptids? My grandmother has stories about stuff like that, and then there's also the stories of the Winnegapi, which are a giant otter, 12 to 15 feet in length. They're still a Jurassic period or Coniferous period otter, so it's possible. I mean, Native Americans have stories of mermaids in some areas, and I wouldn't, anything that a local myth speaks of or that's mythically out there is potentially just an unidentified species of cryptid. Oh, hey John, thank you for asking. This Cuckum boy, how's he doing? Well, he got punished last night because I was dumb. I finally got a trade, an actual trade with him. And unfortunately, he took the trade item to his mother, and she got very angry with him and turned him out for a night. That was last night. I had to apologize. I left him some apples and told him he could stay in the shed out back if he wanted, because I knew it was a cold night. And I know he took the apple. I don't know if he stayed in the shed. I haven't checked, but it's potential. He's been opening and closing that door for a while, so I wouldn't put it past him to go in there. And he was back to his normal place today, so thank God. Glad she didn't turn him out for more than one night. She might have thought that I was trying to bribe him because he asked me for pine cones, and there weren't any laying around in the yard because he'd already taken them all. So I traded him the bread instead, and I put a piece of the pine cone on top, so he knew I was giving it in place of. But it was probably too good a gift, or too good a something, or inappropriate. I did something wrong, led him astray in some way, and yeah, he got turned out for a night, poor guy. Yeah, are you sure? Yeah, confirmed via Kana Images that Mountain Dog Men are here. Yeah, and I lived 7 months around one, down in Douglas County, between November of, let me think, that was like 2019 and May-ish of 2020. He bugged the hell out of me in my yurt. I got pictures of his kana that he laid down. It's Japanese form, runs top to bottom. And he did have Oma in the area, and I'm familiar with Oma's writing because Jen was Oma. And I think he was a family member, but I think he also had medicine person. I think he might have been their medicine person. But he did act a bit like a guard at times too, but not always. He reserved that for special needs, like when the bear was getting way too close to all of us. Okay, Cosmic. I'm wondering what you think of the Sierra sounds. Is it Japanese type Sasquatch? aka Hab Hib Hibagon. Ooh, I haven't heard that in a while. Here in California, or is it that they speak all languages spontaneously? Well, I think what I've been running across mostly in the Sierra Sounds has been Chinese and Japanese for the most part. Um, there are a few Native American words mixed in, but the majority of it has been Chinese and Japanese, which kind of leads back to the Ainu connection again, because some of it's straight up old Ainu. So I think it's more that than anything else, except for the one little language bit that might be Dogman, potentially, that funny sound that I pointed out, that ooh, ooh, ooh sound. So there's that. But no, so far it's been mostly Japanese and Chinese. There's only been very few Native American words in there, and then the rest of it's in English, and with heavy accents. And I finally was able to grab one name out of it, Migwai. So there is potentially, I think it's the elder son of the primary couple, Peace Chief and her husband. I think it's their son. Typically, there's a precedence of order of who's in charge of stuff. So, the matriarch female, or females, because sometimes there'll be several groups that live together cooperatively, and those females will be the ones that direct both groups, both their family groups, to work together. And then you've got the next status, which is the husband. The husband makes sure that everything goes according to what mom wants, and the first son is usually given, special duties. They're either in charge of some sort of special animal, or they control the dogmen guards, and there are different species of dogmen, and some of them don't seem to have the same control to keep themselves in check that other dogmen do, because there's Skookum in this area, and they got a little dogman. He's a pup, but he's got a muzzle, so I think he's being trained to be a guard. And when they are, this is the culturally weird thing that people don't necessarily understand about dog soldiers. They hear the term natively, and they think of particular tribes potentially that had dog soldiers, but they don't understand the function of a dog soldier, and they don't understand the training that a dog soldier went through, and they don't understand their battle tactics, like at times of war. So you can kind of look at one aspect of the dog soldier as being not unlike a berserker, but there's a difference. The dog soldier always worked with an animal of some kind, a horse or a dog typically, usually a dog, and they would attack together in battle. The other thing is they would put themselves in a psych state, and some of the dog soldiers would fight by plugging a spear into the ground, tethering themselves like a dog with a choke neck, uh, collar, almost, keep them in place. It's because they like to tear everything apart by hand if they could. They were martial artists of a type, specialists as it were. They were really good at it too. And they had an ability to control their rage. They wouldn't stop raging. Kind of like the berserker. That's why they peg themselves to the ground. And that comes, through a lot of indigenous cultures. They have various forms of berserkers. Almost every culture that's well known has had some form of, berserker, for one reason or another, either by training or by, using some sort of drug. Philippine Islands, they use a drug. So there's that aspect. And then the other aspect of dog soldiers, especially when it came to the seven great nations, Sioux nations, etc., dog soldiers work kind of like resolution team. They, a group of them would come in if there were two tribes that couldn't get along. and they would help negotiate between the two tribes. Hey, you guys need to do this in order for them to do that, and you over here, you need to calm down, blah 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 blah. And in the event that that didn't work, they'd usually take matters in their own hands, make the decision, and make it happen. So there's those sorts of aspects about dog soldiers that people don't realize. They were also supposed to go in and uh, if there was any kind of hostility with a new group, they were the meet and greeters to go out and try to make peace with you and try to create treaty with you. And their counsel was pretty well sought at one point in time. So there's those kinds of aspects that people don't understand about dog soldiers. Because they only know them from pioneer days and particular battles. They don't know what they were culturally before that. And, they'd usually resolve the competition between tribes with a match of coup, not bloodshed. It was a formal game of who can be the sneakiest, who's the quickest, etc. Whoever has the best soldiers, you're the ones that are going to win. The ones that can tag coup on a dog soldier 3 times, hey, you're the right side. We're going to go with you. If you can't, yeah, you're going to have to take second to what this tribe over here needs or wants. So there was that sort of function too within the dog soldier communities that we don't commonly know anymore. Well, so far I think there's probably Oma, Guanch, and Dogman in that group, as far as I can tell. I'm going to have to, once I get a hold of that cleaner copy with all the hiss out of it, it'll be a lot easier to understand exactly what language forms are being utilized. I managed to grab one phrase that was Cantonese, one word beginning in Tagalog, which kind of tells me that's potentially Guanche, because of what my adopted Guanche father told me about the way they came here, that sort of thing. And then, the one little spurt of actual dogman speaking. So that's what gives me the impression that those 3 species are there. But it could have several other species cooperatively living there. If I hear a lot of Japanese, it's going to be either Dinoskwa or one of the other variants of dogmen, potentially. And that's sometimes the only thing I have to go on is what kind of words they're speaking to give me an indication of what tribe they might belong to. Because typically I don't get to see them. I get to hear them. I get to find footprints. I get to find evidence of them. But it's rare unless they want you to see them that you get a chance. And to do that with any kind of regularity, you actually have to be in their areas, like living habitually. You got to be there for 8 to 10 hours a day in order for them to learn to trust you, familiarize themselves with you, and decide that it's alright to be around you. Which, where I'm doing my new stuff, since it seems like every place dogmen are during the summer is now completely flippin' flooded, and I mean that literally. Before my van took a dump, I did a little drive around, and yeah, every area that I found dogmen in during the summer is now pretty much flooded in the lowlands. So my dogman adventure got nixed for that. That's why I came up here to the mountains, go, something closer. It's only 2-3 miles up the road, and easy walking paths. And I've got 2 ridge lines to go through, with a bunch of box canyons and ravines and a couple of echo bowls, all real prime territory for that sort of thing. And this group really seems to be friendly. I've already gotten a couple of words, which I really need to get on tape. I need to sit in there at some point. And that funny yaller gurgle sound, that was made like 200 feet away from me. And I've heard talking in the same area as, let me think what language it was in. Oh, it was in Abenaki. So that's potentially Oma or maybe Skakam, because these Skakam have been using both Urdu and Abenaki words for some reason. So hopefully I'll be able to catch some of that language, like the peculiar sound, and I'll be able to share them actually speaking their language at probably a pretty close distance. Uh, I've heard the word go, which means dog, and that was an announcement just before the gurgly sound or the whatever that oddball humanish, not humanish sound was. And it was maybe just a couple seconds before, just as I turned on, as I was turning on the camera basically on my phone, is when that word go happened. And then right after I turned off my camera for filming the carving in the root, indicating the lineal tree. And that actually might represent 4 generations. Because I remember my grandmother talking about how the marker would potentially look. And that's the first one I've ever found. And she would said that if trees had been damaged or blown over, that a marker would be either carved in rock or put in a root, and it would be representative of generations, how many generations have had marriages there. And there are 4 spikes off the top of that, so that's 4 generations. That would mean that if they lived an average human life expectancy of 70 years, that puts them 1850s, 1860s would have been their first marriage in that area. So that puts them there quite a while, like 180 years or something. So there's a possible that they're going to be incredibly friendly because there have been hiking trails through this area and their area forever. And I've also been watching the people that hike through, because when the funny sounds have been happening, people will turn and look in the woods in the direction that the sounds are coming from. They'll shake their heads, I don't know what it is. They don't freak out about it because they probably hear it all the time. Uh, but they don't really talk about it. They say, oh, well, it's a sound. Walks on. And there's either somebody screaming for help over there, or there are potentially peacocks somewhere in one of those ravines as well. And in this area, there are peacocks out by Veneta. There was a farmer that let loose a bunch of peacocks. And there's also some peacocks up on a few of the mountains here, because they've, transplanted themselves a little bit. And I'm wondering if they've gotten into that ravine. I need to go in there early one morning, just to see if there are any of them up a tree hollering help, because I've heard the help call during the day, and I'm pretty sure it's not a human. I'm pretty sure it's the bird, because there is a distinguishable difference in the sounds. It's far more nasally sounding in the peacock, for instance. Let's see, last. Hey John, I'm glad I got to be here on your live. Enjoyed it very much. Thank you for sharing your knowledge. No problem, John. Well, anyway, it's been almost 2 hours. I need to scram. But I thought you guys would like that information about what, Uncle Long's lore suggested, that we may have learned our languages by, studying our prey animals, as it were, and mimicking them. And then, just a few little tidbits. Yeah, you're welcome. Glad you liked the show, are you sure? Yep, no problem, Cosmic. I'd rather just, be able to get the information out and educate people about what I've come to understand. It'd be easier for other people if they got, some sort of decent information, or hopefully decent information. It would give people a better ability to understand which things might be more dangerous. And that's also part of my goal. I really want people to understand there are cryptids out there that are dangerous, but there are those that are not. There are those that are actually incredibly helpful and useful, and have some really neat pets potentially. And it'd be nice to be able to figure out how to communicate to them well enough. And the last language thing I got from one of them, they actually introduced themselves. They gave me their name and then asked Anadawa my name, and I didn't I didn't answer. But there was one potentially sitting down in the ravine behind a tree, and I'm gonna go back in. Next time I go back in, I'm going to line up exactly where I was just to make sure it's not an optical illusion. But I'm pretty sure it's not because there's a butt print in the side of the root ball. Looks like something sits there on that side. The fallen tree quite often, so it's probably one of their stop points and something that they sit at regularly. And I may have just accidentally caught them. So I'm going to see if that is an actual sit spot. Because that was just downhill from both of the other language calls. The go, the funny sound that's not placeable. And the word go was not spoken directly where the other sound came from. It was probably 30 feet apart. And that's another reason why I assumed it was two different creatures. And then the other language piece was up by where the root was, and I said, oh yeah, there's a tiny bit of a trailing there. And when I was filming one of the marriage trees, it's been blown, top been blown off, but it's got a fork left at the top, and it's got that rough of branches. It was down in that gully that I was able to catch a glimpse of one, but the language was spoken right behind me, maybe 40 feet or so behind me. So, the name anyway. That's 3 incidences in 4 visits or 5 visits in. That's really high. That's really good. Normally it takes 10-ish visits before I get any kind of vocalization or interaction. So these guys are pretty active and they're pretty used to people. So hopefully that will give some good examples of language communication and whatever else I can catch sound-wise up there. So there is a new ridgeline being put through, new ridgeline trail that will extend another 5 or 6 miles to the east. But I'm going to be concentrating on, the next time I'm able to go up, I will be concentrating on a ridgeline trail that goes between 2 mountains. So it's a huge ravine that the trail passes through. I figure that's going to be pretty good potential there. And I'm going to continue to go down into the bowl area because that's obviously still utilized as a communication point. I did my calls in it, and that's when I started getting, a whoop from the bottom of that ravine back. So there's, top of the ravine and bottom of the ravine. I haven't explored the bottom yet. It's a couple miles down. So I've got to get down in there at some point and see what else is around. And then I think the other trail is like 2.5 miles, maybe 3 miles across. So that both of those regions should yield some pretty good sounds and whatnot. Anywho, I've got to get to bed. I got to get up in the morning and deal with my baloney in life. What's a shard, Ray? And why would I be smoking anything I don't know? And I'm not bribable. You're an odd one. Whatever that is. Anywho, you guys have a great morning and take care.